Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of RiesKitchen. Today we're making an absolute French classic and a gluten-free stalwart that you end up with on nearly every menu that you always think is too fancy to make, but it isn't, and that being creme caramel. I'm going to show you a couple of really easy steps to make this perfect for at home. There's not many ingredients and it's actually quite quick to make, so let's get straight into it, shall we? So first up we have some caster sugar and water for our caramel, eggs, milk, vanilla, cream, and a little bit more caster sugar. So we're going to start with our custard prep first. So first up, into our pot, I'll just pop my cream and my milk. Just get all the extra bits of cream out. And I'm just going to split my vanilla and pop that in the milk and cream as well. Now I haven't turned my pot on with the cream and milk. I just want the vanilla pod to sit in there and just infuse a little bit while I get everything else ready. So now what I have is my ramekin dishes. Now I've owned these for a very long time and ideally I would want one that didn't have a lip in it. You want one with a nice straight side all the way up. Mine are 150 ml up until that lip. And so when I'm filling them today, I need to be careful not to bring my custard up over the lip. It just makes it really hard to get out. So a nice straight side, fluted on the inside is a bit nightmarish to get out. So for your best thing, you want a nice smooth one. So I'm making 150 ml. You could possibly go up a little larger, but you certainly don't want any smaller for today. I also have my baking dish, and in it I have a tea towel. And I know this always seems a bit weird, but I'm just going to lay my tea towel in the bottom of my baking dish. This does two things. It helps stop the ramekins rattling around as they are cooking in the bain-marie in the oven a bit later, but it also helps the bottom of the ramekin not get too hot on against the tin, and so it just protects it a little bit. That way we get a slower, more even cook and a much creamier, smoother custard, which is what we're aiming for. So I'm just going to pop these now in. I can assure you your tea towel will not burn. It'll get wet, but it won't burn. It'll be absolutely fine. So now we're up to the bit that most people consider the scary part, and that's making the caramel. The trick to caramel is don't walk away and do something else and have everything you need right there with you as you're doing it. So I've got my ramekin dishes nice and close. I have a heavy based pan, and that's part of the trick that I want you to think about, a heavy based saucepan. I have a spoon. I have the ladle I'm going to use to take the caramel out of my pot and into my ramekins, and then I have my sugar and water. Because once it gets started, you can't, it'll keep going. So when I first put my heat on, there'll be a lot of steam. You're going to bring it to the boil, and I am going to stir it until my sugar is dissolved, and that's it. Then you just have to let it do its thing. And it'll feel like it's not happening, and then suddenly you'll start to see the golden colour. There'll be less steam, there'll be less bubbling, and it starts to be a really light gold. And what the aim is, we want it to get towards mahogany. The darker the caramel, the more bitter it is. We want it on that touch of bitterness, but not so bitter that it's unpleasant. So for those of you who have a laser torch, we're going to aim for it to be around the 180 degrees. So 175, 180. Because my wonderful cast iron pans continue to hold heat, even when I take the heat off, there is still ongoing heat in that pot, and it's going to keep going. So you need to have everything with you closely. The other thing to remember is that as you put some in your ramekin, your ramekins are cold. So the caramel's is going to want to set. So you need to put some in the ramekin, swirl the ramekin, put it down, put the next one. It's not going to set in your pot yet because your pot's pretty hot. So you need to be able to move them all through. Now this is a 1/3 ladle, 1/3 of a cup. I'm going to use half of it for each one. And I want to get a little, that way there's nothing worse than doing 5 and the last one doesn't have any caramel. So, but I want a little bit to come up the sides. You don't have to line the whole ramekin. The caramel itself, once we're ready to serve, will flow down over all of it. You just really want to make sure that the whole top has that lovely caramel covering. So I think I'm ready to get started. Let's move that one out of the way for a minute. So into my pot goes the caster sugar. And it does feel like a lot of water. And there are recipes on the internet that have a lot less water. But I like to be able to make sure that I can get it dissolved and ready to go. And I just have to cook it a bit longer when it's got more water, because then it will all just evaporate off. So let's turn on my heat. And I want it up pretty high. So on my induction here, I've got it on a 7. And I'm just going to stir it until the bulk of my sugar is dissolved. And then you have to leave it alone. So you can see that's not quite dissolved yet. So now we just have to wait until this starts to change colour. So I've noticed I've got some sugar crystals happening around on my pot. So I've just got my pastry brush dipped in a little bit of water, and I'm just going to push those down in, because what I don't want is for them to caramelise and then burn and add extra bitterness into my caramel as it's bubbling away. So we're still boiling quite hard here. You can still see there's a fair bit of steam coming, but you'll start to hear a difference in the sound as it starts to, most of the water go. And I can also start to smell caramel. Can't see it yet, but you can start to smell it. If I use my temperature probe, I'm still sitting at 100, 101, which means I've still got a high water content. So my pot's been boiling for about 12, 13 minutes at the minute. You can really start to smell the caramel. The bubbles have gone really fine. It's not at caramel yet. The temperature here is sitting at 110, 111. As the colour just starts to happen, and of course a watch pot, and when you're staring at it and you're starting to see the colour, it's really tempting to want to stir it or swirl your pot. Don't. You just got to let the sugar melt and do its thing. So it's been about 20 minutes since I turned the temperature on to start with. I've got some spots here that are getting close to the 170. I'm going to keep going till I get to 175. I have a light golden on one edge, and I'm at 180, and I'm going to call that. So even though I've just turned the heat off, my pot is going to continue to bubble, and I just want to wait until the main bubbles have eased off. So my bubbles are pretty much calmed down, and I have a lovely golden toffee. So now this is the tricky bit. Into my coldish ramekin, and make sure you swirl it all around. Now before we can put our custard into our ramekins, we want our toffee to be set. Now my kitchen's sitting at about 16, 17 degrees today, so I know that that's going to go hard just sitting on the bench. If you're worried, pop them in the fridge until we're ready to use them. But yeah, you don't want the two to mix, you want that to be a nice firm base. So I'm now just going to pop my milk on, just on a fairly low heat. I want to bring it up to, it just gets those fine bubbles on the outside, which is at 90 degrees. Again, if you want to use your thermometer, but just till you get the fine bubbles is fine. So I'm just starting to get those fine bubbles. I've got the skin starting to form. My vanilla pod has released all its beautiful bits of vanilla. So I'm going to turn this off. And now I'm going to put that aside just to cool for a minute or so. So now's the time to pop our oven on to 150 fan forced. So now let's make our custard. So I have our 4 whole eggs, and 2 additional egg yolks and a little bit of caster sugar. Now I'm just going to use a fork. The trick to that silky smooth custard in a creme caramel is to not whisk it. We don't want the bubbles. So with a fork, I'm just going to break those eggs up and integrate that sugar. So the next step in our custard is to mix these two together. Now if I was to either tip the eggs in there or put all the milk in my egg bowl, what I'd do is I'd basically make scrambled eggs that would cook the eggs. So we need to do something called tempering. So I'm literally just going to add a spoonful of the milk, give it a mix, gradually raising the temperature of my eggs. So I'm at the point now I can just tip the whole lot of that in. And I want to scrape all of those lovely bits of vanilla seeds in as well. Now the last step to get that super silky smooth custard is to strain it. So I'm going to use a chinois, which is just a fancy name for a conical strainer. In her The Essentials of French Cooking, the wonderful Julia Child actually told you to use a tea strainer, but I guess that's because most kitchens in her time didn't have a chinois, but I'm lucky enough to. If you don't have a strainer, it's okay. Just take your vanilla pod out now, but you will get a better result for purchasing one. So now I'm just going to ladle my custard through. Our vanilla seeds will go through. And again, I don't want to miss out on any of those wonderful vanilla pod seeds. So as I lift my strainer up. And what I'm left with there is just a little bit of unwhisked egg and my vanilla pod. Now the last step is to fill our ramekins. Now don't forget, I said as like mine, if your ramekins have a lip, that we want to fill it to the top before the lip, because otherwise it's too hard to get out. So I have just over 1 litre of custard mix here, and that means I'm going to have a little bit left in my jug at the end. Now the last step is to turn my dish into a bain-marie. So I'm going to pop it on the first rung of my oven, my top shelf, which is just about the middle of the oven. And then I've boiled a kettle of water. Now there's about 1.5 litres of water in here, and I'm going to pour that boiling water in, making very wet tea towel, making sure you don't put the water in your custard, of course, that it just goes in the dish around, so that they'll end up being around halfway up your dish. Now you should put the water in when it's sitting on your rack, not when it's on your bench, because that's just dangerous to be carrying that level of hot water. Now these are going to take about 35 minutes. When we think we're getting close, we want to give them a little bit of a jiggle. You want it still a bit jiggly in the middle, but not liquid. You'll often see that the top of the custard will have a bit of a dip. That's not cooked yet. Right? We need it all to be fairly smooth. They shouldn't go brown. So we just want that just set. Certainly you can use a toothpick or a skewer to check the middle and come out clean. But it's not always going to come out clean even when they really are cooked because of the caramel underneath. But we just need to wait 35, 40 minutes, usually closer to 35. Let's see how we go. All right, let's check them. I have had to put them on for another minute or two because they weren't quite ready the first time, but let's try again. Yeah, it's pretty clean. All right, now I need to let these sit until they're cold enough to pull out and put on my rack, and then let them come down to fully to room temperature, then pop them in the fridge for at least a couple of hours. Overnight's probably best. As always, the hard part's in the waiting. Now for the moment of truth, which is the plating, and it's the bit that everyone gets a bit nervous about. So I've taken this out of the fridge now for about half an hour. Coming to room temperature is better. Nicer to eat, but also easy to do the next bit. So we need to loosen the top. You don't have to get your knife and go all the way down the bottom. In fact, doing that will muck up your edge. What we need to do is loosen the top. Now I've seen some videos that tell us to just grab it and pull, but I found that not particularly useful for my style. So I've just got here a palette knife because it's nice and rounded, and I'm just going to come into the edge and just spin a little bit. I'm not touching the bottom, and I've got caramel coming out, so I know this is going to work. I'm just loosening. So our serving plate needs to have a little bit of a lip to catch that caramel. So, and over. Now, to make sure that we really get it out in one movement, I'm just going to give it a slosh and another slosh. Looks a bit silly, but what it does is you can feel the custard move. Here we go. Ta-da! The aha moment. How good does that look? Now for all the details of today's recipe, don't forget to check out my blog at the link below. But as always, the best bits in the eating. This is such a sublime dish. The juxtaposition of the sweetness and slight bitterness of the caramel, the absolute silky smoothness of this custard. This is a restaurant grade dish that you can easily make at home, and I hope your family enjoy it as much as mine do. I can't wait to tuck in to eat the rest of this. Until next time everybody, ciao.